G'day everyone, welcome to the Spud Fit Podcast, episode 13. I'm your host, Andrew Taylor. I'm a crazy weirdo who ate only potatoes for all of last year, and I lost a lot of weight and had a lot of health improvements and had quite a bit of media attention and all sorts of things going on there. So it was a big year, and podcast is one of the things that came out of it. The year wasn't just about trying to lose weight and get healthy. It was about trying to improve myself as a person. And so this podcast is about trying to spend time talking to people that can help me continue to improve as a person in various ways, including diet and including fitness and including being an all-round better person. So today's guest can certainly and already has helped me do those things. His name is Dr. Malcolm Mackay, and he is my personal doctor. He is the guy who helped me get through last year. He guided me through, provided my medical checkups and peace of mind that came with them, and he gave me my blood tests and just lots of general advice and helpfulness along the way. So I'm in great gratitude to Dr. Malcolm Mackay, and he should have been a much sooner guest than he has been. But anyway, he's here today to talk with me. So yeah, no complaints. Let's get it done. But first, it's been a little while since I have actually done a podcast. It's been a few weeks now, and I've been really busy. Life is busy, and we've got priorities, and sometimes I have to come first. This is something I've been doing obviously for free. You don't have to pay for podcasts, but it also means that sometimes it has to take a back seat to other things. We've got bills to pay and we've got responsibilities that need to be met. I need to be a good father and a good husband, and I need to also prioritize sometimes the things that are going to help me get the bills paid. So that's why there hasn't been a podcast for a few weeks. I would love to do it more often. I'd love to do it every day if I could, but I don't think that's going to happen. It's a very time-consuming thing putting this podcast together. It takes, on top of the time to organise an interview, it takes quite a few hours to actually put it all together. But anyway, I'm not complaining. I'm just explaining. The point is that something's got to give. So I'm not 100% sure that I will continue doing this podcast. I hope to, but basically I need to find a way to free up some time so that I have more time to be able to do this. One of those things might be starting a Patreon page. A few people have told me about Patreon. It's a page that you can start where fans of somebody's work can contribute money to support them. So I haven't started that. I'm weighing that up whether or not I want to do that. But if I do that, if I do continue the podcast, I'll probably continue it with a Patreon page and see if that can help me, the people that appreciate what I do, to be able to contribute and help me do it more. Anyway, that's enough about me. The point is, I enjoy doing this. I love doing it. I want to be able to do it more, and hopefully I can figure out a way. And it's also just an apology for being a few weeks since the last one. But thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for your support. Enough out of me. Well, not quite enough. I'll introduce the podcast a bit more. But first, the Daiquiri is the sponsor. The reason I have a sponsor is because it's my wife's company. So, the Daiquiri, the DAKKERY.com, the Daiquiri. In Australia, DAKs are short for, tracksuit pants, gets shortened to tracky pants, track pants, tracky DAKs. These are the world's most comfortable tracky DAKs. They are designed by artists, and they are made of 100% organic cotton and bamboo, and they are the most luxurious tracky DAKs you will ever put on your bum. So go to thedaiquiri.com and get yourself a pair. Now, back to today's guest, Dr. Malcolm Mackay. As I said, he was my personal doctor. He helped me through last year with all my medical checkups and tests and et cetera, et cetera. Malcolm, the reason I went to him was because I thought it was pretty weird to do, and it is pretty weird to do a potato-only thing, and I didn't think just any doctor would be able to handle that, so I tracked down Malcolm, knowing that he was very big on a whole food plant-based diet, so I thought potato wouldn't be too far out for him, that he'd be able to support me. And I was right. He was very supportive from the beginning. We'll talk a lot more about that in the podcast. But just a little bit more about him. He's been doing whole food plant-based way of eating and lifestyle for well over 30 years now. He's extremely fit as well. He's an amazing athlete. So we talk about both of those things. And we talk about his journey to whole food plant-based eating and his life as a doctor and an athlete as a whole food plant-based eater. If you want to find out more about him, you can go to his website, wholefoodsplantbasedhealth.com.au, and it's actually a fantastic website. I send people to it all the time. Anyway, that's enough of an introduction. I've been talking long enough. Let's get on with the podcast. Here is Malcolm Mackay. All right, Malcolm, welcome to the podcast. It's a long overdue one. We should have done this a long time ago, but anyway, life gets in the way. But here we are now. We're having a conversation for the Spud Fit podcast, finally. So welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me on your podcast. And I would have rather have been first because I follow on now from John McDougall, Dr. Goldhammer, Dustin Rudolph, a whole list of well-known plant-based experts.
Well, in my opinion, you belong next to them, so don't worry about that. It's all good. Maybe you don't have the same name as them. Not as many people know who you are, but they should, in my opinion. So, hey, well, nothing to worry about. Let's do it anyway.
Okay, Andrew.
All right. So, there are not many plant-based doctors in Australia, and this is it's an interesting story to me about how someone from Australia, where there's really not much in the way of plant-based anything 30 years ago, gets into plant-based nutrition at all, let alone using it in medicine. So let's just go back to the start of your journey for a minute and how did you come to be interested in eating only plants?
I guess I came from a family that gave a lot of emphasis on how food was important for the body and mind. Mind you, it was like protein and meat and eggs and dairy. Yeah. Then I went to medical school, and by about third year medicine, we had one cardiology lecturer who talked about the inevitable process of atherosclerosis. That's all the gunk and scarring that builds up in arteries, leading to heart attacks, strokes, loss of legs, impotence, etc. And for a 20-year-old, these gruesome slides of what would happen with our arteries as I got older was not a pretty sight. And at that point, I was getting back into the distance running that I'd been good at when I was at school.
And how were you eating at that point? What was your diet like? You said you were, you ate healthy foods and your family emphasized good foods and how it's good for the body, but what did that mean to you before that point in time?
I can't remember very clearly. Yeah. Because it's so many decades ago.
It is a long time, yeah.
But no, I don't think my diet would have been appalling. I did tend to like whole grain breakfast cereals. Yeah. I wasn't all that keen on bacon and eggs. My family sort of pushed them on me. I was living in a hall of residence and the meat was pretty awful and it wasn't really encouraging anyway. So I think I did have a propensity sort of vaguely towards, whole grains and fruits and eating some vegetables and things. I wasn't a pure junk food addict.
Yeah. So you were eating like most normal, inverted commas, people in today's society would have considered a reasonably healthy diet anyway, but you still had some animal
Probably
products
reasonable, but not excellent.
Yeah, okay.
And so there was that lecture, and in the same era or the same semester, another lecturer in public health told us about some of the indigenous populations of the world, like the people of highland Papua New Guinea, who had a very low fat, very low salt, etc. diet, i.e. they ate pretty much just sweet potatoes.
Yeah, I did some research on them myself before I decided to do my Spud Fit challenge. Was those Papua New Guinean Highlanders were, one of the things that I looked into before I made my decision. So, yeah, interesting that was part of your learning process as well.
It was very much a part of my journey, and I don't understand why all the other students didn't get it. Like the heart disease risk factors were all around us. Like everyone was eating too much salt, too much fat, too much animal fat, processed food, etc. Too much meat. Not exercising enough. And so when I learned about these Papua New Guinea people living on sweet potatoes, I sort of thought, so this is not an inevitable disease. And from that point on, and then I soon discovered there were other populations that were somewhat similar. They might eat something different like rice, but they're basically eating basic plant-based, very low-fat, starchy food, not adding all the SOS, the sugar, oil and salt. And that led me on a path where when we did other diseases, when we looked at diabetes or breast cancer or bowel cancer, I would always be thinking, I wonder if this is really a worldwide thing. Are there people who are there populations in the world that don't get as much of these diseases or get none of them? And whenever I looked, it was always pretty much the same factors. That is, the people in the world that ate more meat and dairy and eggs and processed food got all of these diseases in great amounts. And those people in the world who lived on, basic
It's all right.
that were basically lived on the starchy plants that they grew.
Yeah.
Often had none of these conditions at all.
Yeah. That's. I just find it fascinating that you're in a class of 100 students.
Well, it was a small medical school. We started off with 64.
Okay, so out of 64 people, you've got one that decided to just look a little bit deeper into the research and find out, what the relationship could be with diet. And it seemed like you're maybe the only person in the group that took that link between heart disease and the Papua New Guinean Highlanders and then just went down the rabbit hole with it. I wonder, it fascinates me, like you said, I don't know why everyone else didn't go down that path with you. Like it was a strange thing.
I think, when I get information, I tend to think it through and process it, and if you hadn't sort of thought deeply and thought, inevitable heart disease, hang on, population without heart disease, mismatch,
Yeah.
think about this. And I don't think everyone always sort of, processes the information like that. Yeah, and I don't claim to be, don't claim to be brilliant in sort of recognising this while I was in medical school. Countless people before, John McDougall, Nathan Pritikin, anyone who's looked closely at the medical literature and put aside their cultural bias and their personal preference, would find the same thing. I think some of the other students, some of them, I think people sometimes pick this up to some extent and think, oh yeah, eat more veggies. But it's like I dive down the rabbit hole. But right, I'm just going to eat whole plant foods. I'm just going to eat brown rice and oats and potatoes and beans and vegetables and fruits. But I think other people just, only a bit cautious. They don't even want to put their hand down the rabbit hole. They don't want to sort of give away their cherished, dairy foods and their chicken and things.
Yeah, it's a tough thing for a lot of people to I guess people feel responsible, and it's hard to put words to it. But people are confronted by the fact that maybe they've been making choices that are not so good for them, despite their best efforts. A lot of the time, people think they're doing the right thing, and to discover that it might actually be hurting them, it's a hard thing to take in, and maybe that's
maybe they just resist change because they don't want to admit that they've been doing something that was wrong this whole time.
I think you're really onto something there. I consider that I see that in patients, that to accept that what they've been doing, is not the best thing for their health, and in fact, has perhaps led to some of their medical problems, is a hard thing to cope with, because it can carry with it a lot of personal guilt. I mean, I don't think patients are guilty of, deliberately poisoning themselves and giving themselves acne and diabetes. They just got the wrong information. They just were in the wrong culture. But yeah, people do get very sensitive about it because it raises some guilt, like, oh, I've got it all wrong, and also raises guilt like, oh, am I stupid? And I think when we often people look at medical experts, doctors, various people educating in nutrition, and often we point at them and say, well, you're being sponsored by Meat and Livestock or Dairy Australia. And we often think that it's the money, or you just want to get more patients to do bypass operations or stomach surgery on. But, I think some of the people are rejecting this because they would have to sort of face up to that they got it wrong, that their culture got it wrong, that their peers got it wrong. And even there's a particular group of doctors. I was a member of this environmental group of doctors, and Jenny and I had discussions with some of the sort of committee members and things, and they were not at all receptive to the idea that part of saving the environment would be changing to a plant-based diet. And it wasn't because there was any money in it or anything else. They weren't dairy farmers. It was too hard for them to consider that they got it wrong, that our culture got it wrong, etc.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm reminded of a saying. I can't remember who it was now. Maybe Mark Twain or something like that said this. That it's easier to convince someone. No, hang on. It's easier to fool someone than it is to convince someone they've been fooled. And I think that probably applies. That people just don't want to. They don't want to accept that maybe they've been lied to, or maybe they've had the wrong information the whole time. So while you're at university and studying, did you talk to your lecturers or your classmates or anything about what you were doing or what you thought was the right way to go as far as diet goes? And if so, how did those conversations go?
Yeah, look, I think I was probably a bit annoying, and I was probably a bit annoying. I've probably often been quite annoying in this respect, in that, yes, I would be telling them. And sort of a year or two after I discovered it, someone brought to my attention some books that Nathan Pritikin had produced, like the Pritikin Program for Diet and Exercise. And that was great, because that reassured me that I wasn't as mad as my classmates thought I was.
Yeah.
And that sort of set me on a path to sort of being a great fan and an advocate of the Pritikin diet. And boy, did I ear bash a few friends and relatives and anyone else I cornered at social functions about why the Pritikin diet was the way they should go.
Yeah, so Pritikin's someone who I have heard of lots, but I've not read a lot about myself. But it seems to be that everyone who has been doing this for a long time, it always comes back to Pritikin, as Pritikin and one or two others. So what can you enlighten me a little bit about what it was that Pritikin did that makes him so special? That
Nathan Pritikin was so far ahead of his time and showed such perseverance. There's a McDougall recorded lecture by Nathan Pritikin of how he found out about the diet and its effects on health. Nathan Pritikin was an engineer who was privy to post-World War II data and the paradigm at the time was that heart disease was due to stress. And so he saw this wartime data and he looked at it, and he was someone who, again, just thought things through and said, well, look at this. Look at these populations who are being firebombed and invaded. They're going to have lots of heart. Oh, no, their incidence of heart disease plummeted. Okay, there's something else going on there. Oh, they're on rations, he thought. And Nathan Pritikin then, looked at learned about some of the other populations in the world that are heart disease free, like the Tarahumara Indians of Mexico, who are incredibly fit. Kick this wooden ball for sort of days as a
they're like ultra
game.
marathon runners, aren't they?
Ultra marathon runners. Well, they're close relatives across the border. The Pimu Native Americans in the US are really fat and sick and have lots of diabetes and disease. So Nathan Pritikin then got heart disease at a fairly early age, and he applied it to himself, and he emulated the diet of some of these. He thought about the wartime rationing. He looked at people like the Tarahumara, and so he went on a starch-based, very low-fat diet. And the Pritikin regression diet, the strictest form of it, is close to either totally or close to a vegan diet, and it's got no added oil, and it's based on starchy food. So it's pretty close to what we would now call a whole foods plant-based diet, except that he had a maintenance diet that allowed a very small amount of animal products.
Okay.
But still no oil.
Yeah, so it's pretty McDougall-ish then.
Yes, but Pritikin was not a doctor, and so
okay.
he tried to put this idea forward, and no one had taken any notice of him, and the medical profession would be critical. He ended up publishing books. He opened the Pritikin Longevity Centre, and he had people working with him and medical people working with him who actually published some of the data and the incredible results they got in terms of taking people who, airline pilots who are losing their jobs and reversing their heart disease, getting people off most of their medications and putting their diabetes into remission.
Yeah, interesting. Obviously, when you introduced him, you said he was an engineer, but it didn't click to me that he was actually he's an engineer, not a doctor or a medical professional or anything. Just someone unrelated making all these discoveries and doing all this work makes it an extra level of incredible to me. So that's cool. Is there anyone else that was part of your research or influenced you in the beginning other than Pritikin? Like, was McDougall around then, or obviously he was around, but was he someone that came across your radar at that point in time? Or
McDougall passed across my radar some years after I'd found Pritikin.
Yeah.
McDougall did cross my radar.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I didn't sort of grasp onto more of McDougall's material.
Yeah.
But he certainly crossed my radar. The Pritikin Health Association that there was when I graduated, the Pritikin Health Association of Australia had just been formed.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and it was actually very, very active. There were several thousand members across the country. There was a guy called Ross Horn who wrote a book about reversing heart disease, who was involved with it. Robert de Castella's father, Rolle de Castella, was involved with it as well.
Wow.
And we had a very active branch in South Australia, and sort of this is going back to sort of the sort of mid to late 1980s, and for several years we had monthly meetings with guest speakers, sometimes myself, but often we had a gut microbiome expert speak to us way back then.
That is way ahead of the time, isn't it? Because that's sort of like, that's the big topic these days, the gut microbiome. And, 20, 30, 25 years ago, 30 years ago even, you were already talking about it then.
Right back then, like Dr. David Topping from CSIRO recognised that the human colon was there to ferment food and process food and involving bacteria. And I remember he made the statement, he said, humans are like cows back to front. In other words, cows ferment their food in the rumen up the front of their gut, whereas humans ferment their food with bacteria in the latter bit of the intestine.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. So you mentioned that for people that are not from Australia, which is probably a lot of people listening, you mentioned Robert de Castella's dad. Robert de Castella is probably the most famous Australian marathon runner of all time. Was his dad a runner too? Is that something? Was there some sort of influence for you? Because you love your running. Was he having him involved in that group some sort of influence, or was there something about this that you wanted to improve your running performance? Was that part of your your reason? You
Yeah, it
went
was
this
really
day?
about
Yeah.
improving my running performance. In
Yeah.
fact, that was part of my impetus for, as you said, going down the rabbit hole and just ditching meat and dairy and oil and going on completely, starch-based, whole grains, legumes, potatoes, etc. diet. Was that I wanted to improve my running. I'd got back into running. I'd been a runner at school, a distance runner,
Yeah.
and it certainly made a difference to my running. I think in 1980, I ran my first marathon. It was a 2:39.
Right. 2:39.
Yeah.
Holy, wow.
And then within a year,
First marathon, 2:39. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
I had the time. I was running this event with a friend, and he wanted to qualify for some event, so he had to run less than 2:40.
Yeah.
So I had all the splits written on my
Uh-huh.
arm, and I wasn't knowledgeable enough to know that was very optimistic. So I just did it.
Yeah, right. So you were like pacing him, trying to help him get to that time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I just thought I want to stick to this time,
Yeah.
and I think about in that year I also came third in the Adelaide Marathon. I ran a 2:32 for that one.
Wow. I
So-
knew you were a good runner. I didn't realize it was that good though. That's pretty incredible. So
And I really do think that that changing to a starch-based, plant-based, low-fat diet, I think that really helped me to perform as well as I did in running and later on some triathlon.
yeah, well, especially from what you talked about earlier about heart disease, it makes sense that to be an endurance athlete, that you need a good, strong heart. You need clear arteries so that your blood can flow properly and deliver oxygen around your body. And that's of primary importance if you want to be a good endurance athlete. So, it makes sense that having all of that working as best as it can would help you with your running. And obviously you found that. So, yeah.
And I think it's no coincidence that traditionally the East African runners, the Kenyans, the Ethiopians, Tanzanians, traditionally ate a very much a starch-based diet, eating things like ugali, maize meal or some other grain.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, people that follow me on social media or whatever lately would have noticed that I've been getting into running. So let's talk about running then.
Okay.
Since you're a running
Yeah.
expert.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've sort of for a long time I've had dreams of doing a marathon, and for most of the times that I've dreamt about it, I've weighed way too much, and I'm still a little bit overweight, but still dropping a little bit. But anyway, the point is that these days suddenly it seems like it's within reach. It's something that's possible. So yeah, what do you have recommendations for me? How do you train? What should I be doing?
I got back into triathlon from about 2006 through to 2012 after many years of actually not competing in any endurance events, but I always ran several times a week. I never quit running ever. But I've also got a bit of life balance in that, and my partner likes to go to the gym, and she's a swimmer, so we do a couple of swimming squads a week.
Yeah.
Jenny's away for a couple of days, and so I didn't go to this morning's swimming squad. I went running instead. I think when you eat a healthy diet, when it's anti-inflammatory, when you're fueling up on all those carbs, when you're not damaging the artery with all that chicken and yogurt and olive oil, I think you can get results with a lower mileage. You can actually get results without doing a huge number of kilometres of running.
Okay. So,
and some of the things, but I think you need to be consistent. And I suppose there might be some weeks where I'm only doing 2 decent runs in the week, and plus maybe a little bit of treadmill warm up in the gym. But if I'm really training for any event, it needs to be about 3 times a week.
Yeah.
And you need to put in the fast running. Like
Okay.
most times when I go running, I will put in at least a couple of kilometres, at race pace.
Yeah.
And so that keeps your body conditioned and teaches your body both, nervous system wise and muscle wise and heart wise to be able to run at that higher pace that you'll be using in a race.
Yeah.
I also think that if I'm training for an event that's slightly longer, if I'm training for a half marathon, I'll actually run a half marathon a week,
Yeah,
When I was training for the Gold Coast Marathon last year, obviously can't go out and run a full marathon, but for many weeks I'd go out and run 30, 32 kilometres as my long run for the week.
Yeah, right. So you don't shy away from the long runs then. A lot of people I've spoken to will just do like 1 or 2 of those 30+ kilometre runs before the.
It depends how
marathon,
competitive you are.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people leading up to a marathon will sort of gradually do a couple of kilometres more every week and get up to 30 kilometres or so, a couple of weeks beforehand. But see, I'm competitive. So, training for a half marathon, for example, I'll be doing 21 kilometre weekly runs for many, many weeks so that I try and get comfortable at that speed.
Yeah. Well, I've been running probably 3 times a week on average, and I've got this weird scooter thing. I think you've seen it.
I've seen it, the push scooter. I used to have one as a child. I used to ride around the suburb a lot on my little push scooter.
There you go. So my plan at the moment, I got a knee injury from football, and it gives me a little bit of trouble. But I started off I want to do 2 hours of training, right? So I started off doing 10 minutes running until my knee got a little bit sore, and then I'd get on the scooter and do an hour 50 minutes on the scooter, and it's gradually built up to the point where now I seem to do about an hour 15, hour 20 before I get my knee a little bit sore, and it works out to be 14, 15 kilometres. And then I switched to the scooter for the rest of it. So I figured that I would just keep doing that until I get up to 2 hours of running 2 to 3 times a week, and just see what happens. Do you think that could potentially get me through a marathon, doing 2 hours 2 to 3 times a week?
I think that would be too much. Too many long runs. Yeah,
right.
I'd only do one run of 2 or 3 hours. Only do 1, 2 or 3 hour run per week.
Okay. So I should stick with 1 hour of running and then 1 hour of scooting, or just 1 hour of running and leave it at that?
It's a bit up to you whether you bring the scooting in as well. But as far as the running goes, I'd maybe do a couple of up to 1 hour runs and just the one long run per week.
Okay.
The other thing I did in the lead up to the last run I did was the Run for the Kids fun run, a 15 kilometre run. Yeah. And my training for that was, part of my training was I'd go out and I'd run with my Garmin watch. I would run 5 kilometres in my training run at the pace I intended to run at for the longer distance.
So that makes sense. So if let's say I wanted to run a marathon in 4 hours, I got to work out that pace and try to train at that pace, you think?
Yeah, and I'd be building up to, say, doing 10 kilometres, maybe even, seeing as a marathon. Probably more like 10 than 5 kilometres at the pace that you plan to run the marathon at.
Yeah.
And on race day, try and be really strict for in the early parts of the race. I fell apart in my marathon last year. The pacing person went out too fast, and I thought, I feel comfortable at this. I'll do that. It'll be just fine. And of course, I wasn't in a good state for the last 5 kilometres.
Yeah, all right. That's not going to be fun, I imagine, suffering from 37 kilometres onwards. All right. So anyway, enough about my self-indulgent training tips here. I've got little dog trying to muscle in on the action here.
He's an attention seeker, that cavoodle.
Hello. It's a vicious thing, isn't he?
He's a carnivore, and if you look at the dog's mouth, he's got all these teeth that are for ripping, and his back teeth are not grinders; they're like dicing tools. It's really funny seeing him eat a carrot because it's like trying to eat a carrot with a set of shears rather than grinding, and he can't move his jaw from side to side. Because he's a carnivore. Actually, he's a true omnivore. The dog, a dog's primarily a carnivore that can eat some plant foods. And I often use pictures of my dog in presentations because my partner Jenny and I do some presentations on the why, what, and how of a whole foods plant-based diet.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to one a few weeks ago, and I went to most of it. I had to go and take my boy to go and watch his first football game, which he ended up leaving because he didn't like it.
Thank you for bringing the potatoes along.
Anyway, so let's fast forward a bit then. So you've spent 30 years or so as a plant-based doctor trying to get people to eat more plants and stuff, and then out of the blue one morning in early January last year. This big, overweight, depressed guy walks into your office and says, "Hey, I'm going to eat potatoes only for the whole year. Can you supervise me?" What went through your head then?
Quite happy to supervise you, but I didn't get it, Andrew.
Yeah.
I didn't get the food addiction. I understand that moderation is a lousy strategy. Like you never tell an alcoholic to drink in moderation, and I'm often immorally amused that some of our weight loss experts preaching moderation are themselves overweight. But I didn't get it. And so my first reaction was, well, I don't know if you got all the nutrients. Why don't you eat just a little bit of broccoli, a spinach, a few berries? I remember even saying that when the project came to my office. I even said that. It took me a while to get it. I think my contribution in the end to what you actually did was, well, all right, Andrew, it just add in some sweet potatoes. It just so happened that in the few weeks before you'd come in, my partner Jenny was studying, doing a graduate certificate in nutrition at Deakin, and she'd actually drawn up some tables looking at what would happen if you ate, a day's worth, maybe 2,000 calories of a particular food in the day. How did that food shape up? Did that food look like it would provide all your day's iron or all your day's protein? How much fiber would it contain? So she'd drawn up these little charts for several different foods. Yeah. And one of them happened to be potatoes. So when I went home that night and Jenny was able to say, well, look, I've got this chart here. Let's have a look at it. I never thought it was dangerous. I remember someone, a university professor, I think he was, made some public statement like, that's a dangerous diet to do, just eat potatoes.
There was plenty of people that made those sort of statements, yeah.
And I was always a little bit concerned about nutrient deficiencies, but dangerous. Dangerous is like drinking protein powder drinks or going on an Atkins diet. That's dangerous, not eating potatoes. Interesting thing that unfolded, though, in terms of the nutrient adequacy of potatoes was, and it made a good point that I think we should all recognise when we do dietary analyses and try and, look at the nutrients in our food, is that according to the nutrient composition tables, potatoes had no fats and they had no vitamin B6. A lot of plant foods have almost no selenium and iodine, not because they don't have it, because no one's measured it.
Yeah, okay.
And so when you look in a food composition table and a food looks deficient in particular nutrients, especially the micronutrients, things like selenium and iodine, often it's the actual database that has the deficiency rather than the food. So your experience with potatoes was I tested your blood and there was plenty of B6. Someone else did a fatty acid analysis and you were not deficient in omega-3 or omega-6 essential fats. So that was an interesting point that came out of that.
Yeah, well, like you said, I had a lot of criticism, especially early on before I'd been going long enough to show that it was a healthy thing to do. But why don't we just go through some of the criticisms then? My personal favourite, I was going to mention names, but I'll leave names out of it for now. But my personal favourite was a very prominent celebrity dietitian said that she was worried about me getting bowel cancer from a lack of fibre in my diet. So what do you think?
I think if I read that, I'd probably do sort of a face palm action and look over at Jenny. I find myself doing a face palm so often when I'm reading our local medical media. I think the obvious thing there is potatoes do have dietary fibre.
Yeah.
And potatoes also have starch. And if the celebrity dietitian had gone and looked at the CSIRO produced fabulous animated video called The Hungry Microbiome, she would have seen that those resistant starch, the starches in food like potatoes, are actually the very thing that powers healthy gut microbes and fights against or prevents the formation of cancer. Yeah. And in terms of fibre, I think potatoes are moderately high in fibre. I'd have to get out Jenny's chart to confirm this. They obviously definitely have some.
Yeah, and if you're eating only potatoes, then as long as you're eating enough, then you get enough fibre, as far as I can tell. Anyway.
Yeah, I would say so as well. Yeah. And there's some studies in of South African black people who were eating a pretty lousy diet. They were eating maize meal, but it was fairly refined maize meal. And lots of starches, but no meat, none of the things, none of the animal protein foods. And they demonstrated a very low incidence of bowel cancer just by the fact that they were eating starch. And when Jenny and I do some of our plant-based presentations, we actually show a graph that's been drawn up in reference to the resistant starch and the starch-containing food. And there's a relationship from country to country that the less starch that's consumed in a country or region, the more bowel cancer there is.
All right, that's another bit of research that I haven't read, but that's interesting too. All right, so a lot of people were worried that I was going to possibly get scurvy over the course of the year. Was that something that you were ever worried about?
No. I know potatoes have some vitamin C, and you only have to open up a nutrition composition table to see they have vitamin C. And then it's like protein. What about protein? Everyone's worried about protein. Why is everyone worried about protein when the only protein deficient people in Australia are not eating because they're anorexic or really sick, and everyone else is getting enough protein? You never see protein deficiency without calorie deficiency. And nearly everyone's fibre deficient, and yet they're trying to choose high protein, low fibre foods.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because that brings up another point that a lot of people said, in the low carb community, people obviously said, it would have been better off if you chose bacon or eggs instead of potatoes. So that's a perfect segue to ask your opinion on that. What do you think? Should I have done bacon only instead of potatoes only?
Bacon is a class 1 carcinogen as of last year, World Health Organization. The processed meat cabinet in the supermarket should at least have big health warnings. This food is known to be a class 1 carcinogen, promotes diabetes and heart disease. I can imagine one day walking through the supermarket and seeing the processed meat all in plain packaging like cigarettes.
Yeah, that's good luck with getting that one passed. But I think that could be that'd definitely be a worthy thing to do for sure.
Back to the bacon and etc. There seems to be a definite resurgence of this idea of eating a low-carb diet, which means eating more fatty food and more protein food. And it usually means eating more animal products rather than flaxseed and nuts.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a facepalm, like even when people aren't really focusing on trying to eat a lot of fat, as soon as they start trying to eat a lot of meat or trying to eat less carbs, they automatically eat more chicken and cheese and oil. And so many patients who I speak to, the women are all avoiding carbs and eating therefore more meat and fat to get thin, and the men are doing the same to get big. And it's going to be a disaster. Some of the cancers that this will cause, the artery disease that's building up, some of these processes take, a decade to develop. So we could be faced in Australia with a tsunami of cancer and heart disease and the like from all this low-carb, high-protein business. And I'm appalled with some of my colleagues who've jumped on board with it. And they look at the minutiae and they go, look at the Krebs cycle and look what insulin does. And if you have more insulin, you'll put more fat in those cells. And it's it's a lot of bull, really, what they're talking about.
Yeah.
In the real world, it's not how it happens at all. And I'm appalled when I read professionals say, one way you can treat diabetes, one option for losing weight is a low carbohydrate, high meat diet or higher protein diet. These are exactly the diets that make people sick, that lead people to get diabetes to start with, that'll give the diabetic person heart disease, that'll give them kidney failure. it's actually quite appalling what's happening in nutrition in Australia at the moment, and it's not. There's no sign that it's turning around yet.
All right. So how did we get to this point then? Why are we in this situation where, most of the country seems to think carbs are bad, and you're better off eating high protein for whatever, paleo, all these different words for low carb, high fat, high protein eating. How did we arrive at this point? What's happened?
A lot of plant-based experts say that people like to hear good news about their bad habits. Oh, butter is back. Oh, high protein. Meat's actually good for you. So, people are naturally attracted to those rich foods, and they like to hear good news about their bad habits. I also think that there's been some industry push, and industries in there giving medical education. Industry has meat, dairy and egg industries have been advertising a lot harder to GPs, to doctors in recent years.
All right. So, I guess you get the industry publications that most of us don't get then. So they advertise in the doctors' magazines, do they?
They certainly do. Like, everybody needs milk, yogurt and cheese.
Yeah, right.
And lots of egg advertisements. And sponsorship of little programs you can do to get professional development points.
Really? I thought that was something that only happened in the US, that that industry can fund continuing education.
No, you can go to Read. I think it's Read Publications, and on their website they actually announced how much it would cost to put together, to get them to put together an education program based around your product, whether it's a blood pressure drug or a heart drug or a food, and they'll sort of put together an education program around that, and then GPs will be able to do that program online and get professional development points. But you, the industry, you, the pharmaceutical manufacturer or food industry, can actually pay for them to help put a program together.
Wow, that's the first I've heard of that. That's, mind-blowing. It reminds me of, again, back to the video I made about the CSIRO low-carb diet book. I found, off the top of my head, I can't remember, but there's a funding body, and NHMRC or something.
NHMRC.
Yeah. So I found a page on their website where they say if you want to fund a study but don't want to do it directly, you can give the money to NHMRC and tell them who to give the money to. So then it looks like the funding is coming from NHMRC rather than coming from Cadbury or something, So it sort of puts a step in between the funder and the recipient of the funding. So... yeah.
My partner Jenny is a university, research-based librarian. Is always interested in following up, where did the funding come from? And sometimes it's really obvious, that like there was a study in Melbourne looking at mood in women, and it found that a Mediterranean diet with red meat improved women's mood compared to a crappy diet. You can guess who sponsored that. A Mediterranean diet. There's the Meat and Livestock Australia in there, but that was declared. So often researchers will declare that they got funding from Dairy Australia, for example. Sometimes research will have been done with funding, and then someone will conduct a meta-analysis where they look at a whole lot of other studies. No funding for that, no conflict of interest. But of course, we've spent the last 10 years getting funding and doing work, and we'll be quoting those studies. But with these front organisations, this is sort of something that's really growing, in that you can have apparent public health, public good bodies promoting nutrition, and some of it being good promotion of nutrition, like eat more fruit and vegetables. But there can be this subtle funding from industry. There's one big Australian group that we were puzzled because they got $70,000 a year only from all their fundraising, and yet they were able to have offices in most of our capital cities and have staff.
Oh, right.
Now, obviously, there was some big industry funding providing those offices. So this idea of having indirect funding and having a front view funding and a funding coming from some foundation, coming from something else, often disguises the real source of the money.
Yeah, and it's funny that they're so out in the open about it too. They're just happy to say, "Yeah, you can give us funding and tell us where to send it." That's I don't know why people don't put two and two together a bit more with these sorts of things. But anyway, another low carb argument that I get, and I'm sure you've got plenty of times as well, is about diabetes and insulin resistance and all of this. So. What's your take on the diabetes argument then, that low carb's better for diabetes because, diabetes is a problem with digesting sugar properly, so take out the sugar and you got no diabetes. So how does that work for you? That's I've probably oversimplified things.
Yeah. Diabetes is we'll stick to type 2. Type 2 diabetes is a problem where your body no longer responds to your insulin, and sugar is not removed from the blood and put away. Carbs are not the carbs are not able to be removed from blood and stored or processed. And so if you went on a Atkins, on a very low carb diet, your blood sugars would be normal, but you'd still have the same metabolic problem that your body was unable to process the glucose, the carbohydrates.
That's a really interesting point, actually, because so what you're saying is that even though your the level of blood sugar would be okay, the reason that the sugar got too high in the first place, that the cause of it is not gone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You'd still have your body, it'd still be highly insulin resistant. You'd still have many other associated metabolic changes in the body, changes to cholesterol and blood pressure and things like that. So, you wouldn't be in good health, but your blood sugars would be good. Dr. Michael Greger's done a very good video on what causes insulin resistance, where he puts together research going back to the 1930s that actually points more to fats, particularly saturated fats. They get into the muscle cells and then the liver cells, and if the insulin is the key that unlocks the door that lets the glucose into the sugar into the cell, then the saturated fat in particular, gums up that lock so that insulin no longer works. And I'm puzzled about why doctors don't know a bit about this, because I'm sure I learned decades ago that saturated fat tended to block the action of insulin. That's not new information. And you can look at things. I like to look at things at different levels. It's like when we look at cigarette smoking, we can look at animal studies. Animals were forced to smoke. That was pretty cool. Yeah. We can look at cell studies. We can look at studies of populations of, identical twins who smoked or didn't smoke, etc. And I guess it's the same with diabetes. And you can look at the population level, where you go, so what happens when parts of China, when they used to live on mostly just rice and mostly white rice, even at that. They hardly had any diabetes. Like China had an incidence of less than 1%. That was like back in 1970, 1980. Now it's like 12% plus, and maybe half the population pre-diabetic. And that's eating a lot less rice and a lot more pork and processed food. And then you can look at animal studies. And, I've laughed sometimes in the last few years. I remember seeing a report of a study being done at Baker IDI, one of our local research institutes in diabetes. And they were looking, a promising new drug was being tested on mice on a fat-rich diet. Like, it wasn't mice on a high-carb diet or a sugar diet. No, those researchers knew how to make those diabetes-prone mice, give them type 2 diabetes. They put them on a fat-rich diet.
Yeah, right.
And I remember Jenny and I at the time doing a Facebook post and sort of saying, look, silly mice, they should have just gone off their fat-rich diet and they wouldn't have needed the diabetes drug.
Yeah. So how you mentioned that you're surprised that more doctors don't know about this stuff. So why don't they know about it? How come it doesn't come up more for doctors to know that this whole food plant-based diet is the best way to treat diabetes? That's a Do you have any thoughts on how that could be, or is it?
Yeah, we all have confirmation bias.
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
we must be aware ourselves that we have confirmation bias, that I will tend to pick out studies that look at the benefits of plant-based diets. Maybe without knowing it, I'm ignoring studies that show that lean beef's good for you. I don't think so, though.
Yeah.
You know, I sometimes say that Michael Greger could be accused of, the nutritionfacts.org person, could be accused of cherry picking and that it's always in favour of plant-based diets. And I say, well, he could be accused of cherry picking, but that's where most of the cherries are.
Yeah.
I think doctors
like that.
doctors don't know. I don't like to be too conspiracy-minded. There's all sorts of reasons. You know, that confirmation bias is a big one for people reporting on evidence, for experts who should be telling the rest of the medical community about information, about personal choices and whether we accept something. This confirmation bias. But in the last couple of years, we've been repeatedly struck by how our medical literature, the medical magazines that come out to educate doctors, to educate GPs, how they continue to miss things. The other day I read something about, osteoarthritis, like, arthritis seems to be much less common among Asian and African populations compared to Caucasians, so maybe it's a genetic racial thing. And you go, no, probably not. It's probably just because traditionally, in times gone in the past, it's changing now.
Yeah.
It was the European people that ate all the meat and dairy and the fat-rich diet, and so they had more arthritis. Things sometimes don't get published. Like only about a month ago, there was a broad study in New Zealand where a couple of young New Zealand doctors who interned with Dr McDougall a few years earlier when they were still in medical school, they did a study where they took 65 patients from a practice, overweight, diabetes, etc., and divided them in two groups in this New Zealand town, and gave the intervention study group all this coaching and cooking lessons, and got some of the local restaurants to provide suitable meals. And there was no restriction of how much they had. But basically it was a McDougall diet. It was, whole grains, legumes, potatoes, fruits, vegetables, not too many nuts, no oil, no animal products. And without any food rationing, just with instructing these people on how to do it, these people lost, I think it was 11.5 kilos in 6 months, and kept it off for 12 months. And the comment on the research, and this was published in a peer-reviewed journal, one of the portfolio of the Nature group of journals. It was commented that this is the greatest weight loss that's been seen in a dietary intervention program that had no restriction on the amount of food you eat and didn't have an exercise program. Wow, that's big news. Did that appear in the Lifestyle Medicine newsletter, in the Australian Doctor magazine, the weekly magazine, in Medical Observer? Did that appear either on the online, headline version of that, or in the print versions? Not a word. I'm still waiting for them to report on it. And I just it's a sort of thing we've been asking ourselves lately. It's not part of there's no big conspiracy, but it's sort of like, what's going on here? Why couldn't they see that?
Yeah.
Sometimes you do suspect industry influence. Like when it came out that there was a large Swedish study that found that women that drank more liquid milk, like this looked at 40,000 women over a long period of time, those women that drank more liquid milk got a higher mortality rate, like they died more, and they actually had more fractures, not less. But they didn't find the same in the for yogurt and cheese consumption. So the week the study came out, the long-standing Dairy Australia advertisement with a picture of milk on the front suddenly changed to yogurt and cheese. And the journal didn't report the study. We saw a similar thing happen when when it was discovered that the high choline content in eggs led the body to produce TMAO, which is an artery toxin. And there were a lot of egg advertisements leading up to the publication. And there was a pause for a period of weeks or months. When the study came out, there was suddenly no egg advertisements for those weeks. We sort of assumed the egg industry didn't want to be, put themselves next to a study that showed that eggs had another bad thing about them, the TMAO. Yeah. But it wasn't reported.
Yeah. Damn. Doesn't it just make you angry? How does it
Oh,
work?
it does. Look, and I keep reading articles about the gut microbiome, very topical in medicine
Yeah.
at the moment, and a lot needs to be learned about this. And I've read some articles where they suggest we could give probiotics, or maybe some sort of selective antibiotic, or we could do a fecal transplant. That means take poo out of one person and put it into another person, a poo transplant.
Yeah.
And poo transplants do actually have some therapeutic effect on
Yeah.
some gut disease states. But in none of those articles did they seem to pick up that a large journal, Nature magazine, at the beginning of 2014 published a study and said, oh, look at this. It only took 3 days of eating a high-fibre starch-based diet to turn everyone's gut microbes into a sort of fairly friendly good pattern, and only 3 days of meat and cheese and eggs to give them a, inflammatory associated with disease type pattern. And none of my medical articles I read about the gut microbiome seem to have seen that. And then I read articles about prostate cancer. I'm sorry I'm going on about this, but
keep going.
Lately Jenny and I have been going like, what's going on here? I mean, we know it's not a conspiracy, but like, what's going on here? Why can't the medical profession see this? At least we've recently appreciated in medicine that often it's best not to do anything about prostate cancer, especially the lower, less malignant grades, particularly in the older men. It's sort of been found that the interventions are often worse than doing nothing. And so there's this sort of watchful waiting term. And you think, look, 2005, Dean Ornish published his prostate cancer study in a high-ranking peer-reviewed journal that showed that he could halt the growth of low to moderate grade prostate cancer in older men. And you sort of think, why hasn't anyone seen that 2005 article? I sometimes wonder why the authors of some of this medical education, why the reporters. New Scientist is another one. New Scientist seems really blind to. They recently had something on dementia and virtually nothing on the link between diet and dementia, which is fairly well established. And you sort of wonder why some of these medical educators, medical experts, journalists haven't at least Googled their topic and kind of looked at a Gregor video.
Yeah, I can relate to that from, again, back to my potato thing when everyone was having their say on it, and for someone to come out and say, oh, potatoes is going to be iron deficient. Like, hang on a second. Google's really simple. You could just Google the iron content of potatoes and you would see that I wouldn't be iron deficient. So to go back to your point about journalists not using just a simple Google search to just check out whether what they're writing is true or not is...
Or nutritionists, nutrition experts not opening up a food composition table. You don't even have to buy one. You can look it up online now. Like whenever I hear about the Mediterranean diet and, eat 3 tablespoons of olive oil a day and for 2,000 calorie a day person, there's a quarter of your calories with no iron, no calcium, no protein, no fiber. And I sort of, with issues like the push to eat more olive oil, I sort of wonder why. I sort of I was saying to Jenny the other day, Jenny, one day one of these Mediterranean diet enthusiasts is going to open up a food composition table and go, holy hell, this stuff's junk food.
Yeah, one day, but whether they'll actually tell anyone else that they've done that is another thing.
The really positive thing here is that while our nutritionists, our dietitians, our doctors are sort of all heading down a blind alley and heading the wrong way, and they'll get beaten up down there before they come out, and it'll take them it'll be a lot of shame and face saving and, well, we've sort of changed our mind because things have changed now. It's going to be very hard for the Heart Foundation to turn around and sort of go, how we said eggs were all right. Well, now we know they not only have cholesterol and no fiber, but they also increase your blood TMAO, which is another risk. It's really hard for organisations like that to do a complete about face and, and sort of save face and keep their credibility. But on the positive side, what I was getting to is that even if our nutritionists, our doctors are not getting the right information, people are finding out about this. People are going online. They're finding out the movement is really big in the US. They're finding out about McDougall. They're finding about T. Colin Campbell. They're finding it out about the hundreds of scientists and doctors in the US, the research being done. Michael Greger calls it the democratization of medical information, where you no longer have to wait for it to come down from the university to the expert, to the doctors, to the patient. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation. You can go and follow Pete, what's his name, and be brewing bone broth. But people are finding out about it. The vegan community in Australia is starting to find out that they can be healthy as well as saving the animals. And I'm seeing an increasingly number of people who have heart disease, rheumatoid arthritis, high blood pressure, who are seeing through the crack in the universe, in Doctor Who terms, and finding this stuff from the USA. So that's really heartening that people are finding out, while the great bulk of the population of Australia sort of are still heading in the wrong direction. A rapidly growing minority of finding out about it. And I say that once people see it, once they see the health benefits of eating whole plant foods, you don't unsee it.
Yeah, and I love that the idea that that it's obviously it's got its drawbacks, but the idea that doctors and nutritionists are no longer the gatekeepers for knowledge. People can. If they think that maybe there's another way, they can go and find it for themselves, and I think it can only be positive. Even though there's so much misinformation out there, I think if people are searching and applying critical thought to what they're reading, then they'll end up at the right solution in the end.
And there's a lot of crap out there, but then, I sort of agree with you that it's good that people are finding out and able to find stuff, even though there's a lot of misinformation out there. I mean, it's always been like that. There's always been patients who have got some idea about their treatment or their diagnosis that they heard from their neighbour's cousin. So it's nothing new to have, wacky misinformation out there.
Yeah. So have you, you're a part of a rare breed of plant-based doctor. Have you had much, resistance from a professional point of view? Have you had troubles with, recommending eating plants to people? How's that going for you?
Yeah. Fortunately, I'm not telling people to that they must not take any medications or that they must cancel their cancer surgery or whatever. And I'm promoting a dietary approach that can actually be fitted to the Australian dietary guidelines. So I've never been pursued by the medical board or fear that I'll be pursued by them, because there's nothing I'm really doing that's not based on evidence.
Yeah.
As far as colleagues go, yes, I have had some kickback. Yes. There's someone I work with who's often sort of brought it to my attention that, hey, Malcolm, not everyone's happy about how keen you are about, plant-based diet and things. Some people are not happy about that at all. It might not be very good for this practice. And I see a patient. I remember one particular patient. He was really worried because he had a strong family history of prostate cancer. And I ordered his blood test. And I obviously, I'm ethically obliged. If someone comes to see me, if they're covered in acne and want to do something about it, it would be wrong. It would be unethical for me not to tell them there's a link with dairy foods. Yeah. Or in this case, the man who's worried about prostate cancer, middle-aged man whose, relatives had it at a fairly young age. It'd be unethical for me not to tell him that it was strongly associated with diet, and that dairy foods in particular were something associated with increased prostate cancer. So I did. I don't tell him. Anyway, he went back to one of the other doctors for his results, and it got fed back to me that, this patient was complained about you because he said that you told him to stop having milk. So that's the sort of kickback I get. There's something else that happens with patients. I think I elucidated to someone else on this the other day. It's like people who are already in the plant-based community imagine that someone comes into me, 30-year-old lady, she's got PCOS, she's had a gallbladder out, she's still taking acne drugs as if she's a teenager, etc. And, and people from the plant-based community goes, I say to her, oh, well, if you stop dairy food and chicken and started to eat more potatoes and things, and you expect that the patient say, gee, doc, I'm so happy. Really great to have someone to give me this news. No, that's not always the case. I do notice we did this patient satisfaction survey, and the branch of the practice I work at had more people saying that they were happy, that they were very satisfied to have more keeping healthy information given, lifestyle advice given to them. But back to the person who you from the plant-based community would say, gee, doc, thanks for telling me about it. I never knew that the cheese and chicken did that to me. No, some of them just about thumped the table. This frown at you. The guys sort of looking, they have this steely look that goes right through you. I remember one man, as I was saying to him, all right, here's your cholesterol tablet. You've only come to see me for a repeat. But, if you eat more of these foods, it'll go up, and more of these foods, it'll go down. And the whole time I'm sort of talking to him, he just repeats, my mother had high cholesterol. My grandmother had high cholesterol. My mother had high cholesterol. It's like, la, la, la.
Yeah, just give me the pills, doc.
Yeah, it's just stop that. But, you'd be surprised. You'd be really surprised from the plant-based community perspective about just how sensitive an issue it is. I sound sexist, but the 30-year-old woman demographic I find is the one I have to be most subtle and careful about. I aim it at people often just speaking in general terms, like if I'm prescribing if it's about cholesterol, I say to someone, whatever level your cholesterol starts at genetically, family-wise, if you eat more chicken, I start with chicken because everyone thinks that it's health food. If you eat more chicken, fish, meat, eggs, dairy, etc., your cholesterol will go up. And if you eat more oats and beans and whole plant foods, it will go down. So you see, that's not actually telling them that it's not. It's acknowledging that yes, it's probably all genetic. But it's also sort of just reminding them it's not saying how much cheese do you eat. It's just saying, if you eat more of these foods, your disease, your condition will go in this direction. Same with acne. I'm not going to tell them like how much cheese do you eat. And when they say to me, when I'm saying to them, well, dairy foods are associated with more acne, when they go, I don't eat much dairy, which means, that they just have, a glass of milk a day and a tub of yogurt and a cheese meal and maybe a bit of whey protein bar. But I don't even try and remind them that they actually, that when they say, I don't eat much dairy, they probably actually eat quite a lot. I stay away from that and just try and keep it like, I'm not trying to shame you. Try and keep it so you're not shaming or embarrassing them, but you're just letting them know, giving them that information that, when research shows that when people eat more dairy, it's sort of associated with more acne, and then it's up to them to interpret that. And I've sometimes even make a note on the patient's file, like, not very receptive to diet, and that's a reminder for me not to mention it next time because they actually seem quite cross about it. What's really surprising, and what I've said to Anna Gism the other week, was that when weeks and weeks or months later the same person says to you, now I was thinking about changing my diet to help this condition, and I'm sort of eating more whole grains now, and you sort of think, what? You actually listened, or you heard someone else repeat.
That must be nice.
It really is very nice.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. All right, so a hypothetical here. Tomorrow morning or sometime next week, you get a phone call from Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister of Australia, and he says, Malcolm, we need you to take over as Minister for Health. What would be your plan of attack? Is that something you've thought about? How would we turn around the health of Australia with Dr. Malcolm Mackay as Health Minister? Any ideas?
If I was just restricting it to Medicare rebates, I'd rebate doctors for the length of time they spent with patients.
All right.
I would make an 18-minute consult pay more than a 6-minute consultation.
Oh, okay.
It's like they keep going on about, want doctors to spend more time, do more chronic disease management, more counselling, and yet the Medicare rebate's the same between about 6 minutes and it's not till between 6 minutes and 19 minutes. It's the same rebate.
All right. Okay.
So I'm fully aware that if I stop and spend a few minutes telling people that what else will make their cholesterol go up and down or help their acne, it's sort of like I'm doing it in my own time.
Yeah.
I'll end up seeing less patients per hour and being paid less. And I think that really needs to be addressed. That's a big disincentive. If you want doctors to do more lifestyle medicine, the Medicare rebate needs to be a bit more time-based. But that's being very looking at the minutiae. What would I do? Well, I'd be understanding that health was outside of the health system, and that the disease management system wasn't really the key to improving the health in the country. That while my colleagues all seem very fixed on, like, cardiovascular risk management, will give you a tablet if your cholesterol is high. No, not everyone who's cholesterol high will be really clever and will look at your blood pressure and your age and your cholesterol and diabetes and will calculate what your chance is, or look up the chart, or and we'll see what absolute risk you're likely to be at in the next 5 or 10 years. And then on that decision, we'll treat your risk factors. We'll give you a tablet for cholesterol. We'll make sure we get tablets for blood pressure and get it down to target. Yeah. We'll add 2 tablets if it's not good enough, or 3. We'll treat you diabetes. That's how we look at disease risk management at the moment. And
I have no idea of any of this. So they're actually getting medication before you've got a major issue.
It's how we manage risk levels.
Wow.
It's like rather than treating the cause, it's like Ornish and everyone else says, it's like we're mopping up around an overflowing sink without turning off the tap. We're not actually addressing why this person's got insulin, high blood pressure, and they're heading to diabetes and the cholesterol's high and things. We're treating them as isolated things with ignoring the lifestyle. If I was the health minister, I would be trying to make it more an across society thing, like bringing a multi-sectorial. I don't know if that's the buzzword for it. In other words, I'd be working against the nutrition side of things, and I'd probably be assassinated really quickly.
Yeah.
The big cow would come to my door and beat me up. The man in the cow suit.
Yeah.
I think we should immediately have health warnings on processed meat. There's no excuse for that. I mean, it's a class 1 carcinogen.
If it's good enough for cigarettes, it should be good enough for other things that fall in the same category as cigarettes, surely.
Yeah, but as you found out when you were trying to not do moderation and quit something, as in quit addictive eating, you had to eat something.
Yeah.
And I guess that's how food gets away with it. It's, if you only had meat, you could live on mostly meat and it'd be better than nothing. Yeah. And you do have to eat. That's sort of how we get to a point where we don't sort of just say no to processed meat or even red meat or dairy. So I think we'd be working very hard to sort of bring in some nutrition education for the public and to fight back against the success of meat, egg and dairy. And I'm saying that with my eyes rolling to myself going, you're not going to win against that opposition. It's like try and bring in a carbon tax and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a country that has a huge coal base and see what happens. You get kicked out of office and it'll get reversed.
That happened pretty quickly. Yeah, so last question then. Similar question, but you're now the head of the CSIRO, so Australia's biggest science body, and you're well, maybe not the head of the whole thing, but you're the head of the nutrition part of it. So, what sort of studies would you like to see done, and what would you be organising if if in the perfect world you could organise whatever study you wanted? Is that something you've thought about? Do you have any ideas?
No, I haven't. But when you talk about that, it's a very good point that, that who funds research does determine what the outcome. I think in the US, I can't remember her name, I think it was Marion Nestle, looked into this and found that most research funded by the soft drink or sugar industry didn't find it too bad. Most of the studies that are funded by an industry, I mean, if you're in a university department and you're doing research and get a lot of Dairy Australia funding for your research department over the years, you're not really going to be out there on the attack and trying to find a link between, dairy protein and cancer or something like that. The funding source, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to cheat on the research, but it's just a sort of design that's going to be done. Like all the olive oil research done at La Trobe University, that'll be designed to look at the benefits of polyphenols in extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah.
It won't be done to see whether the polyphenols in whole wheat or blueberries are better than the ones in olive oil. If I was in charge of nutrition at CSIRO, day one, there shall be no books with the name CSIRO in it, unless it's approved by the department and there's, a fair bit of committee consensus. The dietary practices that are advocated in this CSIRO diet book are in line with the best science.
Yeah, it's not what the answer I expected. I thought you'd talk about exactly what kind of study you wanted to be done, but the books are the things that have the biggest influence that the CSIRO does, isn't it? Like that's what.
There's other stuff that comes out as well, and I'd be trying to focus. I know it's much easier. You can do much more papers. Publish or perish. If you want to do some research that's relatively straightforward as research can be, and where you're likely to actually get some meaningful results, you want to look at some minutiae. You want to look at the antioxidant effect on cells of the polyphenol in olive oil or something like that. But you want to do very reductionist, focused research. The effect of something on a mouse on a fat-rich diet. But I think I'd be pushing it towards more actual research out there in the population, and thinking of that broad study I mentioned in New Zealand, where they actually did a community research project where they got people in the community to change their diet and then measured the effects of it. So I'd be sort of thinking, look, it's still good to be doing more research on the fine details, but seeing we already have so much knowledge about what makes humans healthy, we should be doing more research on how to implement dietary lifestyle programs that do what we know makes humans more healthy. Like, well, if we do this sort of intervention like the Broad study or some school-based program, what will the outcomes be? Some doctor friends of mine were thinking of doing some study on pregnancy. And like if we did a project where we intervened in the women who are pregnant and helped them to eat a really healthy diet, what would the outcomes be in their pregnancy? Would less of them, would they have better pregnancy outcomes for themselves and their babies? I think we need to do a lot more research like that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point as well, because I think most people, well, pretty much everyone really knows that ice cream is not good for you, right? But people who are hugely overweight and having massive health problems still continue to eat ice cream, even though they know that it's a bad idea. So, the knowledge maybe, not many people probably know that about whole food, plant-based diets and that sort of thing, but they do know that they shouldn't be eating ice cream. So to me, that says exactly what you were talking about, that just making these healthy habit changes stick is the hardest thing. That's the thing that is probably most important. And even if people don't change to whole food plant-based eating, if they stop eating ice cream and chocolate bars, that's a big step in the right direction. But so many people can't do it even though they know they should. So every
step you take towards whole plant foods will get better health outcomes. And this is why these Mediterranean diet studies, the whole Mediterranean diet thing makes me cringe.
Yeah.
But that's why the Mediterranean diet studies, or the study in Melbourne, a Mediterranean diet with red meat. Yeah, of course those women got healthier and felt better because they just took one step in the direction of eating more whole plant foods, in this case eating more, grains and legumes and fruits and vegetables, for example.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I remember reading about a study a while ago. I probably can't even find it now, but there was somebody did a study where they went to the third world Africa or somewhere like that, where people were starving, and they fed them meat for a couple of weeks, and they got healthier. And so they said, yeah, there you go, meat is healthy. But it's like, hang on, meat is definitely better than starving, which is what they were before you turned up. But let's not take that as a conclusion that meat is healthy. And I guess that's a similar thing to, if we eat a Mediterranean diet with heaps of olive oil, it's better than eating McDonald's every day, but that doesn't make it good.
No, and I think in nutrition we often do this. It's like, well, olive oil is better than butter, or lean meat's better than fatty meat.
Yeah.
But it's like when people ask me the question about the oil, which oil should I eat? Coconut oil, canola oil, olive oil, and it's sort of like, ask me which cigarette to smoke. There are some that are really mild and low in tar and things, but I'm not going to recommend you smoke those cigarettes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. All right, well, we should wrap this up. But last question, back to the idea of trying to figure out how to make the diet stick. Do you have, if you've got a patient that comes to you and they're like, I really want to change my diet, I'm struggling with making the habit change stick, do you have a bit of advice that you would give to someone in that category?
Yes, I think you need to have the information. Whether that's, Jenny, my partner, and I have a large website which is in part for patient education, patient information, and so I'll often point them towards that.
Yeah. wholefoodplantbasedhealth.com.au.
Yep.
I always get confused. Is it the whole food with an S on the end at foods, or just food?
Yeah. Nowadays, T. Colin Campbell doesn't put an S on the end. It's just whole food plant-based.
Yeah.
When we named our website, we actually had an S on the end, like it's Whole Foods Plant-Based Health.
Yeah, okay. I'll put a link in the
you put a link in
anyway.
there, and our Facebook page. We also use another registered name, which is Plant-Based Health Australia. It's probably the one we should have used on our website to start with. It's easier to remember. So I point them to my website, which has information and links to other people's information. Like you might say to someone, look, have a look at nutritionfacts.org, Michael Greger's site, and have a look at drmcdougall.com. And here's a book. This book would be most suitable for you. I recommend this particular book.
Can you give us a few books then? Give me 5 books.
Dr. McDougall, The Starch Solution.
Yeah.
Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Caldwell Esselstyn.
Yeah.
The China Study Solution by Thomas Campbell. It was previously published under the name The Campbell Plan.
Okay.
It's you can buy it as an ebook, and it's much shorter than the China Study and sort of covers quite a bit of that information.
I haven't read that one. Does that give you diet tips and things like that?
It does, and it gives you practical tips as well.
Yeah.
It's
that's something that
it's like the Reader's Digest version of the China Study, followed by practical information, the China Study Solution. That'd be some of the ones, and I'd also recommend to people that that they sort of have some ongoing support. That'd be really good if they could find people who are supportive. Maybe come to a Plant-Powered Melbourne meetup. That's the new group, that comes out of the Plant Pure Nation community grassroots program idea.
And I've been to one or two of those. It was really nice to be able to sit around, and when I went last, I was eating only potatoes and nobody cared. That was nice.
And then I'd join up. Then I'd be thinking of using some of the joining up in an online community.
Yep.
There's some huge McDougall groups, but here locally there's Whole Foods Plant-Based Aussies.
Yeah, that's a really great group too.
Which now has about 4,000 or 5,000 people.
Is it that many now?
Yeah, it might even have reached 5. My partner Jenny's now they've got 5 admins, including Jenny, but not me because I'd be too strict. I'd be doing too much exterminating.
Yeah. All right, well, I think that's a good place to end it. So, read some books, go to wholefoodsplant-basedhealth.com.au and get some support. And, you can get healthy very quickly. All right, thank you, Dr. Malcolm Mackay, for joining me on the Spud Fit podcast. And thank you also for not letting me die last year doing my potato challenge. And, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm honoured to be on your podcast.
All right, let's do it again sometime.
Yep.
Cheers. Spud up.
All right, there you have it. Dr. Malcolm Mackay. I am forever indebted to Dr. Malcolm, and isn't he great? Isn't he just a great guy? I'm sure you love him as much as I do now. So yeah, there you have it. The episode 13 of the Spud Fit podcast. And I'm really happy with that. That was a good one. That was a really great conversation for me, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too, and I hope you learned something from it. Now, I don't actually have any more episodes pre-recorded, so I'm not sure when I will be talking to you guys again, hopefully very soon. Like I said at the start, though, I'm not sure when this is going to happen again because, like I said, priorities. Things have to happen, and I can't afford to spend too much time on making these. So I'm working on some different things, some ways that I can make this a little bit more streamlined as far as the time that it takes me to do it, and also possibly a Patreon page, like I said at the beginning of the episode. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening, and again, if you're interested, if you need some comfortable and organic and artsy track pants, go to thedaiquiri.com and get yourself the world's comfiest the world's comfiest pairs of pants. Cover your bum in art for your ass. All right, that's it from me today. No, it's not. I forgot to mention that you can join the Spud Fit Challenge if you like. If you're interested in doing a potato-only challenge for yourself, then go to spudfit.com and click on the Take the Challenge tab, and you'll see all the information you need there. All right. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully I'll speak to you again soon. Spud up.